Dr. Friedman, you stated that the administration's energy proposal is really a tax program in disguise. Would you elaborate on that or explain what you really mean by it?
Yes, it's very straightforward. The proposed energy program would impose a very heavy tax, as you know, on crude oil, with a very large sum of revenue coming from it. That tax would be disposed of by government for various governmental purposes. Now, the statement is that it would be refunded. But if it were really given to people in accordance with the amount of energy they used, the tax wouldn't serve its alleged purpose. Its alleged purpose is to give people an incentive to conserve. Well, I have no incentive to conserve if what I spend with the left hand is going to be given back to me with the right. And if you look at the actual proposals for using those funds, it's not at all clear that they are intimately related to the purpose of energy. That's what I mean by saying it's a tax program in disguise. If you really want to serve the function that the energy program should serve, namely to have a more rational and sensible allocation of energy in this country, we all know how to do it. That would be to abolish the Department of Energy, to eliminate price controls on natural gas and on oil, let the market work, and you would find that the so-called energy problem would disappear faster than you could say James Schlesinger.
Where do I sign?
Dr. Friedman, in a Newsweek article last month, you stated that inflation in 1977 was higher than 1976. Also, in 1978, it would be higher in 77.
Yeah.
How much higher will it be, and when will it stop going up?
Well, the easy questions we answer at once. The difficult take a little longer. Inflation in it's not too hard to say where inflation will be in 1978, because that's already largely determined. The rate of inflation in any year is largely a function of what happened to the quantity of money 2 years earlier. Not entirely, but largely. So we can already say what's in the store for us. And I have estimated that something like a 7 to 9% rate of inflation is what's probably in store for us in 1978. Where it will go beyond that in 1979, well, it'll be somewhere in that range, but how much higher it will go depends on the policies that are followed from here on out. All of this is not predetermined. We have a choice about the course of events. In my own opinion, the likelihood is that sometime in the next 2 or 3 years, inflation is likely to get up to 10 or more %. Now, what will happen, where we will go from there on out, that's more complicated. What has happened, in fact, over the last several decades is that we've been on a roller coaster. Inflation rates have risen. When they get up to a high enough point, there's great public pressure to bring them down. They are brought down. Then there's a great excitement about recession and unemployment, and they are brought up again. But each peak is higher than the preceding peak, and each trough is higher than the preceding trough. Now we're on the upgrade of one of those roller coasters now. The preceding peak was up around 11 or 12%. If history continues to repeat itself, the next peak will be higher than that. But sooner or later, the public will demand that it be stopped. And when that happens, it will be stopped, because inflation is a disease that we know how to cure. What's needed is not the knowledge, it's the will. It's the political will and willingness to take the measures that are necessary to stop it. Now again, don't misunderstand me. Inflation is not produced by evil people. It's produced by you and me. It's produced by exactly the same political forces that have sent our government spending skyrocketing. It's because we say to government, we want you to spend more and more, but we don't want you to tax more and more. So Congress listens, it spends more, it doesn't tax more, and it pays for the difference by printing money. And that's why we have the inflation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Why did you?
Dr. Friedman, my name's Ed Arton. I'm in free enterprise, I feel, and I find the income tax totally antagonistic to true free enterprise. Can we run the country without income tax?
Well, there's a sense in which all taxes are antagonistic to free enterprise. And yet, we need taxes. We have to recognize that we mustn't hope for a utopia that is unattainable. I would like to see a great deal less government than we have, activity than we have now. But I do not believe that we can have a situation in which we don't need government at all. We do need to provide for certain essential government functions, the police function, the national defense function of preserving law and order, of maintaining a judiciary. And so the question is, which are the least bad taxes? And in my opinion, and this may come as a shock to some of you, the least bad tax is the property tax on the unimproved value of land, the Henry George argument from many, many years ago. The next least bad tax is a flat rate tax on income above an exemption. So in answer to your question, if I could design my ideal tax system, it would contain an income tax. But it would not be the kind of monstrosity we have now. It would be a flat rate tax on all income from whatever source derived, less only a personal deduction and strict occupational expense. And that kind of an income tax, I think, would be the least inconsistent with a strong free enterprise system. Thank you. You know why? It's an interesting thing if you're talking about taxes, about why it is that the property tax is so unpopular. It's not unpopular for good economic reasons. It's unpopular, in my opinion, for one simple reason. It's the only tax left on the books for which people have to write a big check. The income tax is a far worse tax. But, and I have to admit that I have some part of the guilt in this process, because during World War II I worked at the Treasury and helped to design the withholding system. My wife has never forgiven me for it. But with respect to the income tax, we've arranged it so it's taken off bit by bit and it's almost painless. With respect to the sales tax, we pay a little bit of it each time. With respect to the corporate tax and excise taxes, they're hidden in the price of things we buy. We don't even know we're paying them. But with respect to the property tax, that remains a tax that we as individuals have to pay and that we have to write a big check for. That's the fundamental reason, in my opinion, why it's so unpopular. And in fact, I think, I hate to say this because it's giving hostages to fortune, but if you wanted to reduce the unpopularity of the property tax, the way to do it would simply be to provide for an effective method whereby it could be withheld at source in small payments, and that would eliminate a large part of the objection to it. Yes, sir.
Dr. Friedman, in light of the current farmer strike for higher farm price supports and their complaint that they're going broke, can you offer any comments on your opposition to any farm price supports?
Well, you know, it's a very interesting sign of the change that has occurred in this country. The farmers have always complained. So have the rest of us. But the interesting change that impresses me is the change in the focus of their complaints. If you go back a century to the farmer protest movements of the 19th century, the Greenback movement, it was always directed against Wall Street. The complaint was that the money changers in the temple, the financial people, the people in Wall Street, the banks, they were the ones who were forcing the farmers to pay high prices for their products and receive low prices for pay high prices for what they bought and receive low prices for what they sold. But as we have shifted from a free enterprise society to a welfare state, The farmers no longer complain about Wall Street. I haven't heard a single complaint from them about Wall Street. Now it's Washington they complain about. Now, of course, the farmers have many complaints, so do the rest of us. But in my opinion, there is no justification whatsoever for any government involvement in the pricing of farm products, either up or down. The pricing of farm products ought to be determined in the market, as should other prices. The farmers, like the rest of us, regard anything good that comes along as only their just due. And so a few years back, when farm prices were very high, farm incomes were higher than they had ever been in recorded memory, I didn't hear of any farm strikes against those high prices. I didn't hear of any voluntary action by farmers to pay extra taxes because their incomes were higher. Well, you got to take the good with the bad. When you're in the farming business is a very large-scale capitalist business these days with a wide range of income. It's going to be good some years, it's going to be bad some years. A free enterprise system is a profit and loss system, and never forget the loss part. If you have a system in which losses are eliminated, you will eliminate the heart of a free enterprise system, which is to make people responsible for their own actions and to provide a system under which they are induced to use their resources effectively, under which if they engage in bad ventures, they get out. That's the fundamental difference between the market and government. When government engages in a losing venture, you know what happens. It gets doubled in size. But in a market system, if somebody engages in a losing venture, he has to go out of business. And that's more important, really, than the profit side, in my opinion. Well, that applies equally to the farmers. So I do not see any justification. But more important, suppose they got their way. We've been down that road before. What does it lead to? It leads to government control over agriculture. If the government is going to set the price, if that price is higher than the market price, then you either accumulate stocks, as we did at one time, or else you have compulsory reductions in acreage and production by the farmers, and they will complain about that. But I want to say one other thing of a very different kind. I believe that the farm protest has been enormously exaggerated in the news media in terms of where it comes from and what it means. You have a very small fraction of the farm population that is engaging in these. The major farm organization of this country, the Farm Bureau Federation, to my opinion, to my knowledge, has not participated in these strikes, has not supported these strikes, has not encouraged these strikes. What you have is a rather small, marginal group of farmers who have been able to get a great deal of media attention by engaging in all sorts of picturesque events, such as lighting up tractors and driving them around Plains, Georgia.
Dr. Friedman, you have quoted as saying the Social Security tax is the worst tax on the books, and in your opinion, it should be abolished, the whole system. What would you suggest to use in its substitute its place?
Well, now, there are different levels on which that question can be answered. One, dealing with the Social Security system as a whole. The second, dealing simply with the financing of present Social Security benefits, so-called, without going into the question of whether those benefits themselves should be changed. Let me limit the question to that second level. Here again is another case where I believe the fiscal conservatives have been on the wrong side of the issue. The fiscal conservatives have tended to support the payroll tax and matching the payroll tax to expenditures. They have tended to support the notion that the Social Security system should be self-financing. In so doing, they have been supporting a fiction. The Social Security system is not in any relevant sense an insurance system. The taxes that people are paying under the Social Security system are not in any relevant sense financing the benefits they themselves will ultimately receive. The Social Security system is a combination of a bad tax and a bad expenditure program. I have never heard anybody who would defend either half separately. And taking two bad things and putting them together doesn't generally make something good out of it. All right, now, by supporting the notion of these two being self-financing, the fiscal conservatives have, in fact, tended to support the notion, the fiction, that this is really an insurance scheme. It's not an insurance scheme at all. What it is a scheme whereby people today are paying taxes today to provide payments and benefits to other people today. There is a small relationship between the amount beneficiaries receive and the amount they themselves pay, but that relationship is very small. Insofar as there is that relationship, you can justify an element of payroll tax. But insofar as a large part of Social Security benefits are properly to be understood as subsidies, welfare payments, there is no justification for financing them out of a payroll tax. In my opinion, the appropriate, if you're going to finance them, they should come out of federal revenues. Now you will say to me, oh boy, my, but that's terrible. Does that mean that you're supposing that we should increase other taxes? No. Let me go back to the fundamental principle. Government is going to spend whatever the tax system will raise, plus a little more, lately a good deal more. The only effective way to keep down government spending is to keep down the amount of money available to government to spend. There's no other way you can do it. The effect of linking the Social Security, of having the payroll tax, and of spreading the notion that somehow or other the payroll tax is related to the benefits. The effect of that has been to make the American people willing to bear a larger tax load than they otherwise would bear. I argue the other way. Reduce taxes whenever you can. Remember my main point that the deficit is not the thing to worry about. What you want to worry about is total spending. If you reduce the payroll tax and throw the burden on the general tax level, that will be the only effective way of stopping even worse programs. After all, you have had a strong movement for a long time for a national health program, which would be a disaster. It would mean worse medical care and more expensive medical care for the American people. What has been preventing that from being enacted? Only the difficulty of financing it. Let the fiscal conservatives join in making the payroll tax more acceptable and making the payroll tax higher, and you will be providing the financing mechanism for National Health Service. Instead, lower the payroll tax. Throw this on the general revenue, and you will be taking away the revenue base for programs of that kind. So where are you going to finance it? By not adopting bad government spending programs. That's where I'm going to finance it. And that's where, not I don't mean personally, that's where the political pressures, the realities of the political mechanism will finance it. And as I say, it's another example of the way in which the actual effect of measures that people have been taking have been very different from those they intended to take.
I wanted to see if what you think about this suggestion for focusing public debate more into the free enterprise area and engine of enterprise, that sort of thing. Up until now, stockholders and corporations have been rather unorganized. They have not spoken in a loud voice, have not even had any mechanism. I wanted to see, do you have any ideas of how stockholders could be mobilized a little more, could open up their meetings to more debates of issues that would be relevant to improving the enterprise system, towards making election of directors a function of how directors promote efficiency, economy, and less burden on the stockholders?
Well, frankly, my answer to that is that stockholders are citizens, that they should express their values in this sense through as individual citizens. I do not believe that businesses are either a proper means for shaping public policy qua businesses, nor an effective means. You talk about preserving the free enterprise system. Who has been destroying it? Business community must take a large share of the responsibility. We must not, you must, I'm going off my topic for tonight, but you must separate out being pro-free enterprise from being pro-business. The two greatest enemies of the free enterprise system, in my opinion, have been on the one hand my fellow intellectuals and on the other the big businessmen, for opposite reasons. My fellow intellectuals are all in favor of freedom for themselves. After all, if I say to them, you know, it's terribly wasteful to have 10 people do research on the same topic. Don't you think we ought to have a government planning bureau that would assess the priority of various research projects and decide who should undertake it so we could eliminate these terrible wastes of competition? They will say to me, why, don't you understand the process of scientific research? Don't you understand the necessity for academic freedom? For allowing people to choose their own subjects? Of course, I do understand it, and I agree with that. But when they come to the rest of the community, it's different. It's terribly wasteful to have 4 gas stations on 4 corners. We ought to have a government bureau that eliminates that overlapping competition and that assigns priorities and sees to it that things are done right. So the intellectual is all in favor of freedom for himself and all opposed to it for everybody else. The businessman is very different. You cannot get a businessman on a podium. I don't mean to be, talking about all of them, but I'm talking about a very large fraction of them. You cannot get them on a podium without them uttering generalities about the desirability of free enterprise systems. But when I come to their own business, that's something else. When the head of U.S. Steel talks about free enterprise, he doesn't mean free enterprise for steel. Oh, no, he wants the government to step in and protect him from competition from those Japanese who are undercutting him. When the oil industry talks about wanting a free market, some years ago they weren't talking about freedom. They wanted percentage depletion. They wanted oil import quotas. They wanted Texas Railroad Commission to pro-ration on. When bankers stand up on a platform and talk about the great desirability of free enterprise and the free markets, and I say to them, you mean you don't want the government to limit the amount of interest that you are required to pay on demand deposits? You want to have free competition. Oh, they say, that's different. We like that. So almost every businessman is in favor of free enterprise for everybody else, but special privilege and special government protection for himself. And as a result, they have been a major force in undermining a free enterprise system. And so any hope that you're going to protect a free enterprise system, you really mean to say that you expect U.S. Steel stockholders to propagandize for free trade? Is that what you expect? Now, I don't don't misunderstand me. I don't blame the executives of U.S. Steel for trying to get limitations on imports, or the executives of some other corporation for trying to get tariffs. They're doing what they were hired to do. They were hired to make money for their stockholders, and they're trying to do it. And if the rest of us are such fools as to let them make money by getting tariffs, or by getting import quotas, or by getting other provisions, then we're the ones to blame, not they. But stop kidding yourself into thinking that you can use the business community as a way to promote free enterprise. Unfortunately, most of them are not our friends in that respect. Now, I want to make an important distinction, and that's between the big, large-scale corporations and small business. Small business, the only major business organization in this country that is almost consistently on the right side, from my point of view as a believer in free enterprise, is the National Federation of Independent Businessmen. NAM, the Chamber of Commerce, the CED, I can't predict on which side they'll be. They may be on the right side or they may be on the wrong side. But the small businessman is on the right side. Now, that isn't because the small businessman is any nobler, any more ethical, any more moral. It's for two different reasons. Because, first of all, he's spending his own money and not somebody else's. But second, it's because he knows he can't be effective in government. And therefore, it's in his self-interest to be for the right thing. And again, I'm not decrying that, I'm only describing it. And again, let me emphasize, there are some great exceptions. There are some businessmen who, in their capacity as businessmen, have been staunch defenders of free enterprise. I don't mean to say there haven't been any exceptions. But do not kid yourself in thinking that the corporation as such is the channel that anybody is going effectively to use to promote free enterprise ideas.
Dr. Friedman, do you believe that we ought to have an audit of the gold in Fort Knox?
No.
And also the Federal Reserve System?
No, I believe we ought to sell off the gold in Fort Knox at a public auction at the highest price that we can get. I do not see any reason why the storage of gold should be a nationalized industry. I believe private people should be free to own gold, to do whatever they want with it. And I do not see any justification, any more justification for the U.S. government having a large stock of gold in Fort Knox than for its having a large stock of copper or steel or other things. You might justify a small strategic reserve in order to be able to have something that we could use to bribe some people in Africa or Asia if the time emerges. But beyond that use for gold, I see no justification. Don't kid yourself in thinking that we're going to have a gold standard again. And my remarks are not to be interpreted as saying that an honest-to-God gold standard might not be a good thing. It might be. The kind of gold standard we had in the 19th century had something to be said for it. But we haven't had that kind of a gold standard since 1914, and we aren't about to have it again. And therefore, in my opinion, the right thing to do with the gold in Fort Knox is to auction it off to the highest bidder. Maybe we ought to do it over a 3 or 4 year period in order not to spoil the market. But other than that, that's what we ought to do.
And do you believe we ought to have an audit of the Federal Reserve System, or we should have an audit of the Federal Reserve System?
Audits of the Federal Reserve System. You know, if you're going to ask me about the Federal Reserve System, my ultimate solution is to abolish it, and that would eliminate the necessity for an audit. But that isn't going to happen tomorrow. It isn't going to happen the next day. The problem with the Federal Reserve System is not that it needs auditing. The problem with the Federal Reserve System is that it is following the policies which Congress imposes on it. And in my opinion, what we want is not a more independent Federal Reserve System. What we want is to require Congress to be responsible for setting forth more specific rules for the conduct of monetary policy. Now, you're getting into a very broad and difficult issue, and I warn you that what I'm saying now are statements that you could not possibly accept on faith, but that they are statements that are based on a good deal of thought and consideration, that I believe we need a more responsible monetary policy. And I do not believe that an audit of the Federal Reserve System would in any way whatsoever contribute to that more responsible policy.